Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. Let me unpause. In the last part, we brought the XR2 up from KSC, and we did the expert ascent, where we have everything kind of dialed down to its more difficult settings. We have the APU set so that it's burning more quickly. We only have 7 days worth of locks instead of 14. And we just have everything, kind of set on its most difficult setting. Now we need to rendezvous with the ISS, and unfortunately with the way that we took off, the ISS is on the other side of the planet, so it's going to take us a while to rendezvous. So the first thing we're going to do is go over to the ascending node and get that last little bit of relative inclination. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up this glass cockpit view so we can have these larger MFDs that'll show up better in the playback. When I need to, I will switch back over to the panel so that we can see all the vital information. And I'm going to try to be fuel efficient with my rotations. Instead of using prograde, retrograde, and all those, I'm going to basically do it like this.
Translation. Rotation.
Put in one tap of yaw that way, and then use 10x. By doing it that way, I can save a little bit of RCS. Okay, now, as we're getting up to the ascending node here in just a moment, I just need to press a little bit of 8 to push the vessel down. Get in closer. Okay, now let me rotate a little bit so that we're level with that center line. And the yaw position I don't think matters, but we'll go ahead and get yawed over to prograde. I think it's okay to turn prograde on once you have yourself established already in that position, but using prograde to get you there can be wasteful. Okay, pitch up just a tad. Alright, now 8. Oops. Forgot to switch over to translation.
Translation.
There we go. And that will bring the relative inclination all the way to 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit more just to get the estimated thrust also down, hopefully to 0, 0, 0 like that. There we go. Now, once we get over to apoapsis, we'll circularize. And I don't feel any great need to do that manually. So we'll bring up burn time calculator, press MD. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to circularize. It'll just take that much longer to close the distance over to the ISS. So I'm only going to bring periapsis up to 200 kilometers.
Rotation.
Okay, I'm going to get rotated. Getting close to that point. So now that I'm in that position, I think it's okay to actually leave prograde on to make sure the vessel keeps you in that position. It burns very little RCS to keep you there. Okay, and main engine. Raise our orbit on the other side out to 200. And we'll go with that. Now I'll turn prograde off. And I'm guessing we're going to have to orbit the planet for maybe a day, because we can keep track of how long it's going to be here in the mission elapsed timer. We've been gone for 39 minutes. So before I even worry about sync orbit or transx, I can just warp time forward to close the distance. Radiator is deployed. It's been 5 hours so far. Let's go a little faster. See, we're slowly catching up, actually. Let me think about this. Guess we were further back than I thought. Okay, now we're exactly on the opposite side. Now we're about a quarter of an orbit away. Okay, we're close enough now that we can start thinking about rendezvous. That took quite a bit longer than I wanted it to. 3 days. Didn't take off at a very good time, apparently. How do I want to do this? Do I want to use sync orbit or transx? I actually prefer transx, but I wonder if I should use sync orbit just to do something different. So we'll target the ISS. And we're either going to use ship's periapsis or ship's apoapsis. Let me extend this out to 18. And we'll use ship's apoapsis because we're coming up to that point first. Yeah. So what I want to know is what is the altitude of the ISS when I get to my apoapsis. And here's how I'll figure that out a little easier. Is I'm warping time forward, and I'm just going to wait till this yellow line is right over top of my apoapsis, and I missed it because I wasn't paying attention. But it's going to be close to 409 kilometers, somewhere around there. So now what I'll do is I'll come around to my periapsis, and I'm going to raise my apoapsis out to that point.
Translation. Rotation.
So let's get rotated. 1 blast of rotation and then 10x to speed it up. Okay, we're at the prograde position. So now I'm going to go ahead and use prograde to keep me there. And with just a little bit of main engine, I'm now going to raise my apoapsis out to about 409 kilometers.
Translation.
That'll be good enough right there. So we're saying we're going to rendezvous with the ISS at that point. So now what I need to do is to come around to that point and figure out what the difference in time is between my orbital path and the ISS. And we do that with sync orbit. Ship's apoapsis. Okay, now according to sync orbit, my difference in time is 433.5 seconds.
Rotation.
So right as I'm getting up to my apoapsis, which is now,
Translation.
I want to figure out if I need to lower or raise the time. And I need to go prograde, so we're going to put in main engine until this is down to 0, which is probably going to raise my periapsis to a point where my periapsis becomes the apoapsis. So in other words, the highest point of my orbit is probably going to be on the other side. So we're going to have to change this from ship's apoapsis to ship's periapsis. And let me check. Yeah, apoapsis is now on the other side. So we're now rendezvousing here.
Rotation. Translation.
And we'll go with that. Now we've got to go around 18 orbits. But I want to double check now what the altitude of the ISS is at my periapsis. So I'm going to warp time forward until the ISS is at that green dot, which it is right now. I'm going to go down to 0.1, and its altitude is 409. So you can see our periapsis is 409.7, so right at this point, my altitude is 409.7, and the altitude of the ISS is 409.7, so we're off by 700 meters. That's not much. We can definitely rendezvous, but since we have to go around so many orbits, I might as well correct that, which I will do at apoapsis. So I'm going to lower my periapsis by 700 meters. And the only reason I'm doing it is because we've got the time to do it.
Rotation.
Okay, here we are at apoapsis.
Translation.
So I need a bit of reverse translation to bring my PEA down. There it is. Now my PEA is 409, and we know that the altitude of the ISS at that point is 409 kilometers. Now doing that bit of adjustment, that 700 meter adjustment, that will have changed the DT min. You can see here now we're 6.79 seconds off. So in 16 orbits, when the ISS gets to that point, we're going to be separated by 6.79 seconds. That may not seem like much, but it's actually a lot. So we need to come back now, finally, to that periapsis point. And we're almost there.
Rotation.
And now we'll go prograde.
Translation.
And with just a little bit of translation, can fix the difference in the DT min. Now all I need to do is go around until the ISS and myself are at that point. Now the DT min probably won't stay at 0.00 for all 16 orbits. So when I get to maybe orbit 5, I might want to do a bit of a correction there. But let's go ahead and set up our communication equipment. I believe it's 135.30. $131.30, and we'll go with whatever 137.40 for the docking, and that will be fine. So now we're going to sync orbit on this side, just to keep watch on the DT min as we go around. But now all we have to do is go around, 15 orbits. So let's warp time forward. You can see that's fluctuating back and forth a bit.
Rotation.
Just going to hit kill rotate. Hopefully prevent the vessel from spinning around so much. And we'll go to 10,000. That went a whole lot faster than I expected it to. And you can see now that the DT min is off by quite a bit, so we're going to have to do a correction now. Be careful with those time warps. So as I'm coming around to periapsis,
Translation. Rotation.
just need to get the vessel in the prograde position, or more specifically on the center line. And I don't have a lot of time for the time warp, so I'm going to use a little bit of RCS to speed it up. Should have started that sooner.
Translation.
And now with a little bit of translation, can zero out the DT min. Okay, now that should hold for the next 2 orbits, so I'm not too worried about it. But what we can do also is check one last time, and there isn't much we can do about it, but we just want to make sure that as the ISS is coming up to our periapsis, which it's almost right there, that its altitude is 409, and it is. And if it's off by 100 meters or 200 meters, it's not a problem. We can still rendezvous, but I just like to check there when I'm getting close to the end that it's still where we think it is. Okay, so I don't really need orbit. I guess at this point I can bring up the docking MFD, and I can switch over to docking HUD. And we'll warp time forward slowly to close the distance. And it's been 3 days, 16 hours. I'll go to 1,000 just because we still have a whole orbit to go. We can see here as we get down to the last orbit, everything still checks out. 0.00 relative inclination, 0.00 DT min. So we have one orbit to go. Okay, and what you don't want to do, in my opinion, you don't really want to warp time forward all the way to that point, because that's when you're actually, rendezvousing. We can see we're 63 kilometers out, and we know we're on track, so we don't need sync orbit really anymore, but I'll go ahead and keep it open just so you can watch. Now, I don't know if sync orbit tells you what it thinks your difference in velocity is going to be at the actual rendezvous. It doesn't look like it. This is just telling us what our difference in velocity is right now. So what I like to do is bring up burn time calculator, and I'll switch the engines over to retro. But in order to do that, I have to open the retro doors. Now I'll switch engines to retro, and I'll type in this number. I'll press DV and put in 63. And burn time calculator tells me that using the full power of the retro engines, I need 376 meters to slow myself down. But this number's coming down as I get closer to the ISS. So once I get down to maybe 20 kilometers, I'll update again. Okay, now we're at 20 kilometers. So if we put in this new number, which is about 30, then we can see that according to burn time calculator, in order to eliminate 30 meters per second using the full power of the retro engines, we need 85 meters. And that number is continuing to go down the closer we get. So we'll do another update at 10 kilometers. Now we're at 10 kilometers and we're down to 12.5. So we only need 14 meters in order to eliminate the difference in velocity between ourselves and the ISS, and that number is going down even more. So basically we don't need to worry about not slowing down in time because our encounter velocity is almost nothing. Let's rotate and look at the ISS. And there it is right in front of us. But we'll go to the velocity vector. And unless this goes up for some reason, then we don't need burn time calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and power that MFD off for now and just slowly 10x, very gently, warping time forward to close the last little bit of distance. Relative velocity is increasing a little bit, but it won't be significant. It's about 13 meters now.
5,000. 4,000. Translation.
Go ahead and get the vessel rotated so that the velocity vector, so that we're pointed at the velocity vector.
Translation.
Putting in a little bit of translation there to bring the velocity vector over top the ISS to make sure that we're
Rotation.
pointed that way. Now we're going to switch to nav 2. Copy that information to the HUD so we can see where the docking corridor is at.
Translation.
And I'll actually go ahead and translate down. I like to go maybe down to 3. I don't need to go all the way out there. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this velocity for now. Warp time forward.
1,900.
And there's really no need to use the retro engines.
Rotation. Translation.
We can use translation to get rid of that little bit of velocity.
600.
But we don't necessarily want to bring the relative velocity to 0 at this point, because we still need to move forward. So I'm just bringing it low enough that I can close that distance. And once I'm inside the docking corridor, then I'll rotate toward the ISS. And I'm just using translation not only to eliminate the velocity, but also a little bit of up, down, and yaw, or rather lateral, to keep myself aimed toward the docking corridor.
Rotation.
And I'm going to start the rotating.
Translation. Rotation. Translation.
Okay. Now I'm in the docking corridor.
Rotation.
So there's a couple things I'm going to do. Let me first of all get the red X in position by rotating that way and then down. Actually, I'm being a little sloppy with my RCS at the moment.
Translation. Rotation.
And we're rotated where we need to be. The one thing you'll find is that the space station rotates a bit itself. What you can do, and I'm pretty sure this is standard actually in the real world. I think we can tell the space station to stop rotating, and we can press F3 and get inside it, or we can use remote vessel control. And now we've got the ISS selected, and I'm going to say kill rotate, and that will just stop it from rotating, and that will make docking easier. I usually dock while it's rotating, but I think it's actually more realistic to do it this way, to tell it to stop rotating.
Translation. Rotation.
And now we're moving forward at, 0.11. So I'm going to speed that up a little bit.
Translation.
Now we just have to close the distance. By telling the ISS to stop rotating, this X should stay centered basically the whole time, unless it takes us a really, really, really long time to dock, which it won't. But if it did, then it's possible that the ISS would start rotating again. So we're pretty close. Let's go ahead and open the nose cone. Close the retro doors. We don't need those open. We never even used the retro.
Rotation. Translation.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to dock if you tell the ISS that kill rotate. Like I said, usually I actually dock while it's rotating, but the more I thought about it, the more I... And the reason I did it was because I just assumed it was harder, therefore more realistic, but I think it's actually more realistic to tell it to stop rotating first, because I think that in the real world, when they do their docking, they dock to a ISS that has, zeroed out its movement, I think. Pretty sure.
Rotation.
Just a little bit of rotation there. But it's a whole lot less than it usually is.
Translation.
And we're almost there. Slow things down a little bit when we get closer. Because a half a meter per second I think is a little too fast to dock.
Rotation. 30. Translation.
Yeah. Okay, we're 20 meters out.
20. 15.
I'm going to slow down to 0.10. Yeah, there's still just a tad bit of rotation, but it's not much.
Rotation. Translation. 10. 9. Rotation. 8. 7. Translation. 6. 5. 4.
Almost there.
Rotation. Translation. Rotation. Translation. 2. 1. Contact.
Houston, we show capture and hard dock. Congratulations.
And there we have it. That's the rendezvous and docking complete. So let's take a look at how we did. We're at 3 days and 20 hours. Took us a while to rendezvous because the difference between ourselves and the ISS was pretty great. So we had to go around the planet for quite a while. Like I said, though, once we get to the ISS, I'm going to make the assumption in this video series that we have the resources that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and turn external cooling on, and that will have our vessel being fed oxygen from the ISS. And we're also going to refuel before we go out to the moon. But obviously that's going to be in another part. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, but let me Control S to save. And once we come back, we're gonna actually look at what it takes to go to the moon using this vessel, because remember, this vessel is configured so that it doesn't have as much capacity, as much range as the default XR2, so we can't simply just refuel the main tank and go out to the moon. It won't work. So we'll cover all that when we come back. If you have any questions about this part of the video, go ahead and leave those questions down below, and if you like the video, leave a comment, and I will see you next time. I will see you in the next part, rather. Okay, now let me rotate a little bit so that we're level with that center line. And the yaw position I don't think matters, but we'll go ahead and get yawed over to prograde. I think it's okay to turn prograde on once you have yourself established already in that position, but using prograde to get you there can be wasteful. Okay, pitch up just a tad. Alright, now 8. Oops. Forgot to switch over to translation.
Translation.
There we go. And that will bring the relative inclination all the way to 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit more just to get the estimated thrust also down, hopefully to 0, 0, 0, like that. There we go. Now, once we get over to apoapsis, we'll circularize. And I don't feel any great need to do that manually. So we'll bring up burn time calculator. Press MD. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to circularize. It'll just take that much longer to close the distance over to the ISS. So I'm only going to bring periapsis up to 200 kilometers.
Rotation.
Okay, I'm gonna get rotated. Getting close to that point. So now that I'm in that position, I think it's okay to actually leave prograde on to make sure the vessel keeps you in that position. It burns very little RCS to keep you there. Okay, and main engine. Raise our orbit on the other side out to 200. And we'll go with that. Now I'll turn prograde off. And I'm guessing we're going to have to orbit the planet for maybe a day, because we can keep track of how long it's going to be here in the mission elapsed timer. We've been gone for 39 minutes. So before I even worry about sync orbit or transx, I can just warp time forward to close the distance. Radiator is deployed. It's been 5 hours so far. Let's go a little faster. See, we're slowly catching up. Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. Let me unpause. In the last part, we brought the XR2 up from KSC, and we did the expert ascent, where we have everything kind of dialed down to its more difficult settings. We have the APU set so that it's burning more quickly. We only have 7 days worth of locks instead of 14. And we just have everything, kind of set on its most difficult setting. Now we need to rendezvous with the ISS. And unfortunately, with the way that we took off, the ISS is on the other side of the planet. So it's going to take us a while to rendezvous. So the first thing we're going to do is go over to the ascending node and get that last little bit of relative inclination. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up this glass cockpit view so we can have these larger MFDs that'll show up better in the playback. When I need to, I will switch back over to the panel so that we can see all the vital information. And I'm going to try to be fuel efficient with my rotations. Instead of using prograde, retrograde, and all those, I'm going to basically do it like this.
Translation. Rotation.
Put in 1 tap of yaw that way, and then use 10x. By doing it that way, I can save a little bit of RCS. Okay, now, as we're getting up to the ascending node here in just a moment, I just need to press a little bit of 8 to push the vessel down. Getting in closer.